listening to the Christian Ghetto Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Christian Ghetto Podcast. I am delighted to be joined by the Black Horse, by Johan Kreutz, and Big Tuna. We're going to be discussing today the, Peanut the Squirrel, but perhaps Peanut the Squirrel is a jumping point to discuss the power of meme culture and whether we should take memes seriously or not. Anyways, welcome, guys, and I look forward to the conversation. A day before the election, because these things are important with less than 24 hours to go.
There you go. I think it's worthwhile at the outset here to kind of set the frame for the discussion. Sure. So we got Peanut the Squirrel, who the authorities of, I think it's New York State, executed for being an unauthorized pet of some description. This is a very, very effective propaganda meme for the right online. You see it everywhere. Cute little animal, the state killed him, very clearly a left-wing state, very easy propaganda dunk. And so if your mind is on what will help Donald Trump win the 2024 election, Peanut the Squirrel is a big win, right? He's a propaganda gift to the mega coalition at a really good time. He's really mimetic. It's great from that point of view. The question is, it's also really dumb. It's also really low. And so there's an argument that goes something like, we should not have to live inside a propaganda bubble where Peanut the Squirrel is a real issue that's being discussed, 2 days before an election. So those are kind of the two sides to this argument. Nobody's going to argue that Peanut the Squirrel is not an effective piece of propaganda, and I don't think anyone's going to argue that Peanut the Squirrel is a really serious issue that we all need to be deeply concerned about for the next 6 years. So within that frame, what are the thoughts about how we should respond to this as an online community?
One of the initial thoughts, perhaps, is to raise a point that has been made about this campaign in general, is that, being almost 60 now myself and having lived through more than one or two campaigns, is that this is perhaps the most vacuous campaign all around that I can remember. It really isn't about policy at all. Nobody is really talking about policy at all. And it's actually kind of bizarre. Kamala Harris's whole campaign, even Joe Biden's campaign, really wasn't about anything other than, he's not Donald Trump and she's not Donald Trump. It was, we're going to bring joy. We're going to have vibes. We're going to have feelings. It's going to be fun. All of these types of things are there. And so everything is running right now on symbols and mimetics. From the Trump campaign, there's even less policy than when he ran in 2016 and 2020.
There's no build the wall this time.
There's no build the wall. There's no lock her up. There's no drain the swamp. So there's all of these type of policy things. Oh, and then we're going to be winning on trade. We're going to show China who's boss. So on all of these issues, that nothing has really changed. So everybody kind of basically knows where Trump stands on all of these. And so that really this is a campaign, it's almost like the Jerry Seinfeld show. It's a campaign about nothing. And I think I think people have observed that in some sense, that really we have a campaign about nothing.
I think there's this interesting question of, there's certainly a filter that these communications are going through, which is very low resolution, right? So we're having a whole discussion about the death of a squirrel in a society that kills probably 1 million animals a day, right? Many of which are as innocent as Peanut the squirrel was of whatever moral sins he was guilty of. But Peanut is a meme, right? That's what he is. He's like he's a signifier for something, and I think that's interesting to interrogate.
Condensed symbol.
He's a condensed symbol, exactly. There's this field in computer science, and I think it emerged out of philosophy, called semiotics, which is the study of signs and symbology and the compression of information into these very, very efficient carriers, which we recognize as symbols, like alphanumeric characters and computer language and so forth. And humans are very good at compressing these very complex concepts, like their emotions, their perception of the world, their understanding of how they're being treated and their status in society and the direction of society as a whole, into these signs, into memes. Like a very well-crafted meme is a simple image. And, as we know, the best right-wing memes have very small amounts of text, whereas the left memes are terrible because they contain too much text. They're not efficient semiotic carriers. And for me, the question is like, what's Peanut a carrier of? If we unpack that, can we find really interesting ideas there? Is there something that people are struggling to communicate that Peanut had to die for us to communicate to the world, to reveal to the masses? Or is it like, is there just something as shallow as they killed a squirrel? You know what I mean? Like, I think there's depth there, and I think that's what's interesting to unpack.
That's an interesting point. My initial impression of Peanut is that he's a carrier of the broad kind of anti-joy sort of... If you think about the way that men, particularly white men, perceive Kamala Harris, it's as this kind of... like the vice principal at your high school, right? Her job is to kill your joy. And...
which made the joy meme that so funny.
Yeah, because it's completely tone deaf in the way it communicates to that demographic. Yeah. Right. And I think Peanut the squirrel kind of taps into this, right? All the videos of him with his animal shelter owner are, they're fun. They're funny. They're great. And then, it's a way of communicating, this is why we can't have nice things, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like we talk about serious content. Carlo Lancelotti, who was the translator of Augusto Del Noce's philosophical works into English, had a tweet this morning that I thought was very insightful. Like libertarians think the oppressive power of invasive bureaucracies. And then he puts in brackets, example, the squirrel killers. So now you have the whole ethos of the administrative state can be encapsulated in, one little thing you can put into square quotes, the squirrel killers, is a manifestation of the excessive power of the state. But Hannah Arendt thought it actually made possible by the weakness of the political power in an atomized society, which I thought was very insightful in a sense of that when your culture is organic and it's built around real communities and it lives, the squirrel killers don't have any purchase or power. Things like this might happen, but when you're dealing with a local policeman who knows everybody, when somebody calls up and says, somebody is buying or keeping a squirrel in their house, the police captain says, not to worry about it, ma'am. We know who that is. Everything's all fine. Everybody likes the squirrel. Just, it's okay.
Buzz off and mind your own business, right?
That's exactly it. And so in a community that's real and extent, these types of things don't happen. I think that's what Carl's trying to say, is that it actually, instead of showing the strength of our side, it shows the weakness, because now you can have some busybody can call up, a 1-800 number, can complain anonymously about their neighbor down the street who's got this squirrel and is posting videos about it on Instagram. And this is a threat to society.
Well, and as we know from totalitarian societies, very often they've got some other petty grievance, right?
Yes.
My neighbor cut me off in traffic, so I'm going to complain about his squirrel and get his squirrel killed.
I thought there was an aspect to this that was perfect for you to comment on, Kraptos, which is that they killed the squirrel. Like, a lot of people are outraged that they went into this guy's home and took the squirrel. But I think an under-discussed detail is the fact that after they had done that, they killed it. And that is a bizarre decision unless you're enculturated into a pure policy playbook style of discussion, right? In that it's a squirrel, it's a native animal to the land. You can literally just release it. But there's presumably some policy playbook which says that captured animals have to be euthanized. So therefore they killed this thing, which was totally unnecessary because of the sort of like the administrative state.
I actually went and did a little bit of research, believe it or not, to be prepared for today's discussion. So, this is how I spent part of my morning, right? So apparently in trying to apprehend Peanut the squirrel, one of the officers was bitten. And so now you're treating it like a biting dog that has to be put down. So that's the offense of the squirrel is not so much the fact that he owns a squirrel, but in trying to detain and apprehend and put the squirrel in animal control until, things can get sorted out. It understandably reacted poorly and bit one of the officers. And because he bit one of the officers, now has to be euthanized. You cannot make this stuff up.
Yeah, and it's the perfect example of why government is so useless, because you wouldn't have gotten bit if you didn't come into the guy's house. And the other perfect example of like this explosion of mimetic power was back during the debate between Trump and Kamala, when he said they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. And of course, that lit the entire internet on fire when everyone heard about it, because it's one of those things that's just so outrageous when you hear it that you can't believe it. And Chris Rufo offered to pay someone to find out whether it was true. And then we found out, well, there was a different immigrant in a different town in Ohio that was eating cats, but it wasn't in Springfield. And then the people in Springfield said it was happening. The city commissioner said it didn't. But what the whole fiasco brought to light is that there shouldn't be 25,000 Haitians in a town of 50,000 Americans in the first place. And that's the power of the meme, is in both of those cases is to sort of draw the public's attention toward the sort of banal evil of our government.
And I think in that sense, it's absolutely right. And this is one of the things that, meme power does is it exposes the state in ways that, all humor sort of tries to walk a thread, right? So the best humor goes right up to that line that's offensive, that's too far, that goes too far, but doesn't step over it. And in going that far to right there, it allows you to examine and expose things that we all see, but are afraid to talk about it. But because the comedian makes us laugh about it, we can now expose it. This is something that I've argued in the past, that one of the reasons why racial tensions and ethnic tensions are rising is that we call it political correctness.
The taboos are very strong right now.
Yeah, so you can't tell any ethnic jokes. And as a result, what happens is you don't get to laugh about yourself. Your friend doesn't get to laugh about you. But also at the same time, you don't get to have who you are exposed in certain ways, So being Dutch, right? That's the thing, right? Hard head, what is it? Wooden shoe, wooden head, wouldn't listen, right? So it's funny, but it characterizes you have to acknowledge that if you're part of a Dutch ethnic set, that every Dutchman is hard-headed. They just are. And they're opinionated, and you can't convince them of anything they don't want to be convinced of. But you can laugh at yourself that way.
But I think the bottom here is, Johan astutely asked the question off the top, what's the semiotic of Peanut the Squirrel? Well, we kind of have the answer. It's this kind of state overreach, and because it's Kamala running, we have the longhouse element of the state overreach, right? She is the perfect avatar of the administrative state, and the administrative state killed a cute squirrel, right? It's a perfect semiotic to communicate that feeling, which is why it's such a great piece of propaganda in the election campaign.
If I was if I was to get really pretentious about this, and Kraptos, I blame you for this because this is entirely inspired by your recent writings on propaganda and Elul. I think we can actually go one level deeper than that correct identification by Black Horse just now, which is what's the deepest level at which we're emotionally responding to this situation? And this is very pretentious, but I do actually think there's an element of truth here. The thing about an animal is by definition an innocent, right? And kind of the central myth of Western society, Christian society, and therefore Western society, the story that our entire civilization revolves around is one of an unjust death of an innocent. And whoever can, I don't think this would work, for example, in Roman or pagan society. You can't delegitimize a regime by saying this regime's actions resulted in the death of an innocent. But in Christian society, you can. And so both societies, both ends of the political spectrum are trying to pin this death of an innocent narrative on each other. So when you see children at the border and you see wailing over children separated from their families, it's the innocent as the victim, i.e., the sort of Christ-like perfect figure that hasn't yet committed any crime that is being persecuted by the regime that delegitimizes the Trump regime. Whereas on the other hand, you have the sort of faceless men in black that have come and executed an innocent squirrel on the demands of the state.
So Peanut is a type of Christ.
Peanut Christ,
but
yeah.
As soon as you're saying that, though, in that sense, Peanut the squirrel then becomes a kind of Gerardian scapegoat. But it's a Gerardian scapegoat that is a sense he lacks a kind of because he's not quote unquote serious, it exposes the mechanism of the state without evoking kind of a violent response. It allows you to kind of see it in all of its, like, what the essence of what it is. And he exposes that for what it is, but it's not the same thing as if they say had descended and, killed a whole village full of people in that regard.
Yeah, there was another video that went viral. Yeah.
Oh, I think you broke up there. Unless it's my.
Yeah. Can you hear me again?
Yeah, you were just breaking up there. There we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was another video of a guy getting beaten up by cops at a sports game. And one feels much more cautious about voicing strong opinions on that. Because if you're exactly right, if there is some kind of deeply unjust assault and battery that has happened to an innocent man there, that demands real consequences. Whereas everyone felt absolute license to go crazy with Peanut because there's a sense in which it's confined to the online. We're not going to have a George Floyd, Minneapolis riot, cities being burned down over Peanut. So he gives permission to fully voice, unfiltered, the satisfaction one feels in one's soul.
And Peanut has no ideological content in that regard. You're not going to go through his Facebook page and find out like, oh no, he was actually, a Nazi and it really was deserved, or oh no, it's just they're looking to set up another fake rooftop shooter type of thing. So you don't have any of the kind of ideological content with some of the recent types of events that we've had with either the failure of the state or state overreach. Peanut the squirrel is largely just ideologically empty. So you in that sense, it becomes almost the perfect sacrifice because he is an innocent and he doesn't command, like there's nothing, you can't say that Peanut the squirrel is an evil Trumpist or whatever. It's just, you're just seeing the pure state at work in its essence. Like this is the essence of the administrative state. Somebody comes, they call, and the anonymous hotline and the state apparatus, jumps into gear, and it punishes the innocent squirrel.
Well, it's somebody from out of state, no doubt. I mean, you have somebody that was not even in the state, had nothing to do with these people who made the phone call.
By the way, this is thank you. It's Steve is joined us as well too. So it's yeah, no, yeah, that's exactly, it's sort of, that's part of the kind of anonymity in that regard.
Yeah, and the other part about it not being like a partisan sort of meme is it's not like the Haitian thing, the Haitian Springfield Cats deal, where Trump mentioned it on national TV, and it's like the owners aren't like MAGA people or something. In fact, like their background is like not really important at all. And as you said, the squirrel can't do anything. And what is still interesting about it is that people immediately sorted themselves. Someone had a post about this on Twitter. It might have been like Aristophanes or something, but it was how people immediately, without any coercion or any top-down mimetic messaging, immediately like recognized what the stakes were. And they recognized the subtext of the meme immediately. And so you immediately had it, in a way, becoming like a right-wing thing. It's still, it's not like it's exclusively a right-wing thing, but that's the way it sorted itself out. And it's still, there's the plausibility of denial. And so like I've had two different people texting me memes of this stupid squirrel. But yes, there is sort of a way in which this meme is different than a lot of other ones that have shown up in the last year because it has a power all its own.
One of the things I think that Peanut the Squirrel does is it, in addition to having no ideological content, does sort of lay out perfectly the nature of the administrative state. And that, I think, is really what makes it such a golden meme, is that there's no way that you can criticize Peanut the Squirrel for Peanut the Squirrel. All his only crime was biting a police officer in self-defense. And, so it's one of these things where this is just how the administrative state works on multiple levels. So, you talk about, the Midwest farmer and his, dealing with the Bureau of Land Management and water rights and so forth. These are the same kind of things that they have to deal with. You deal with somebody who's trying to put up a new development, and these are the types of things that they deal with. On almost every level, when you're trying to reform something or you're trying to do something with the state, all of these mechanisms just basically come into play, where there is some policy, it gets initiated, and it's followed out to the letter. And, Peanut the Squirrel has to die because he bit an officer while trying to be apprehended. It's just the more that you look at it, the more that it just sort of hits you in the face of like, this is a distilled symbol for the essence of what the administrative state really is.
I think Black Horse made a great point in our chat, which I'd love for him to pick up, which is that there's a real danger with this discussion, as there is with any situation in which we are fully leaning in to somewhat spurious memes because we believe they will have power in influencing political decisions and opening people's mind to the realities they're currently close to. Which is that this is, as Black Horse said, it's a somewhat embarrassing discussion to be had, right? I mean, we're 5 grown men here discussing the death of a squirrel who bit a police officer. And I'm sad for the squirrel, but also I'm not even on the same continent as the squirrel, and I'm staying up late to have this discussion. So something has gone very wrong here. And I think Black Horse is right in that there is something unfortunate about the nature of democracy, which means the level at which we should be having this discussion is the level at which, we write in our essays, and we're having this discussion here today. The level at which we are forced to engage on Twitter is purely through these kind of semiotic means where we're compressing grand, complex, and important ideas into the most palatable, simple, mass consumable, viral version possible to attempt to sway a democratic electorate. But in the process, this can go very wrong, right? Like if because we've lost so much resolution in our ideas in trying to communicate them in this way, there's some dimension to the story that emerges that makes this whole thing more embarrassing. or a whole narrative is upset by, because we're having to rely on this specific vehicle of symbology that we have no control over, and that's very, very lossy.
Do you want to go ahead, Black Horse?
I mean,
Or no?
this gets back to the fundamental issue here, right? This kind of propaganda is absolutely essential in fighting battles in mass democracy. There's no way around it. You can talk about the medium of Twitter all you want, but when JFK launched the Kennedy song as his key ad in the, whatever it was, 64 election that he eventually won, it was content-free in the same way Peanut the Squirrel is content-free. This kind of semiotic propaganda is as old as mass democracy is, maybe older than it is, as old as trying to sway the mob is, right? All governments that rely on sort of vox populi, vox dei as their governing formula are going to have this exact kind of low content nonsense propaganda in them. They always have, and they always will, because even if you could communicate more precisely than you do over Twitter, the mind that you're trying to connect to interprets these things at a very, very base level. So, I mean, you can talk with the media of Twitter all you want, but you just don't get away from this as long as the governing formula is that the most number of people agree with me. So it's kind of a feature of the system that we live in, or the governing formula under which we live. And I kind of don't think there's any getting away from that, even if you ended the kind of tyranny of the algorithm.
As you're talking, Blackhorse, sort of three thoughts occur to me. One is, I think that we've gotten to a point, and this is perhaps more clearly seen today than at any point sort of in my own political consciousness, which sort of runs about 30 years now, is that we're really at a point where the focus has become not the content of policy across the system, but the medium is the message. And I think during COVID, I think that was, even though COVID was a vehicle for content, I think people began to realize that COVID was just one crisis like another crisis. And it just gave them more impetus to enact restrictions and controls and to do the administrative state thing. But people began to wake up and realize that what we're seeing in COVID is the essence of the administrative state. And so in a sense, you're seeing the medium and not the message anymore. And in a sense, the administrative state is almost becoming pure medium. And that's in a sense what Peanut the Squirrel does, is by being content free, it reveals the sort of the content free nature of the system. And then the other thing you're saying about democracy, and this is something that Carl Schmitt noted, is that, and Elul as well too, is that voting is not working from the people up. That because real power resides in the administrative state, that politicians in many ways represent the administrative state to the people, because they all present in theory, at least anyways, they're supposed to present the plans of the experts to the people. And then the people give them a yes or no vote and then add legitimacy to the plans of the administrative state. So you're in a sense, you're not really voting for oversight. You're voting yes or no on the plans of the experts. And what we're really seeing kind of, if there is no content, that kind of really begins to break down. And then finally, the other thing is that I think there is a function here of not so much the breakdown due to democracy or a democratic system, but a breakdown of a corrupt authority. Because one of the things, if you go back, and this is one of Walter Ong's thing when he talks about orality and literacy and the power of the word, is that when they introduced the printing press, one of the first things that the printing press allowed people to do was to criticize the church in a mass situation. So you have the early pamphleteers, and they had to bypass the censors of the church. And so you couldn't get a church imprimatur. So one of the ways that they did it was they would write these pamphlets. Basically, they'd be effusive praise for the things that they're trying to criticize. So they would go so over the top, right, in their praise of these ideas that they made them look ridiculous. Or they would do the other thing. They would then present the ideas that they wanted to have put forward, and then they would do like weak critiques. So you would present like, well, no, we're just criticizing these ideas. But the critiques were so weak that it really made the ideas stand alone. But this was a medium that was made possible by the printing press. So in some sense, there is this thing that the vehicle of mass media, the printing press and other vehicles are a way to bypass the control that authoritarian system. Once a system is no longer able to exert that control from the community and is exercising it from the top down, it can be subverted by mass methods of communication very easily, because the top-down apparatus can no longer control the messaging. And I think that's what we're seeing again.
One thing that's very interesting about memes as a medium is that, and this relates to the censorship aspect of what you were discussing before. There is, of course, censorship by the state, which has to be bypassed. But also, at this point in our civilization's history, people have so internalized self-censorship that if they encounter radical ideas in their raw form, they know to reject them. And this is a real problem, for example, in England, where England, unlike France, unlike Germany, and other continental countries, and indeed unlike the United States, has a real anti-radical tradition. We have a very centered, perhaps it's more like Canada, we have a very centered view of ourselves and understanding of ourselves as tolerant and reasonable. And I think that probably has something to do with our history of empire, whereby we had to manage a great disparate number of nations who acted in very different ways to us, and we had to have productive relations with all the colonial subjects and so forth. We understand ourselves in very anti-radical ways. So we have two very milquetoast parties. Even our radical parties like Reform are actually pretty milquetoast as well when you examine them. And there is a reason for this. It's not just censorship or repression. It is that British people self-censor and they won't vote for someone that they understand as genuinely radical, because they read that as culturally unpleasant in some way, improper. Even if they agree with them entirely, they won't vote for them because they see that as a concession to yobbishness. There's a similar thing with memes, right? Where people want to understand themselves as tolerant and cosmopolitan and liberal and welcoming to the stranger. And if you look at the cats and dogs meme in Springfield, on the surface, people were pretending to be outraged that somewhere someone might be eating a cat. But below the surface, I think what they were doing is they were finding a way to accept a narrative that these people are meaningfully different from you, so different that they won't integrate into your society. And at the surface level, a lot of people don't give themselves the license to accept those narratives based on surface facts like ethnicity or country of origin or whatever it is. But under the surface, if you're able to reconfigure that signifier that this is an other, this person is not like us, they follow things that are anathema to us. If you're able to find a different way to express that, that is entirely new, and that does not trigger the allergic propriety defenses that a lot of people have established within themselves. Suddenly that meme, it's like a disease that finds no natural resistance in the wild. It suddenly runs rampant, and everyone has free license to engage in it without feeling like they've embarrassed themselves or shamed themselves in some way. Well,
as you were talking about that, Johan, it made me think about like a recent news story. This happened this morning with my wife and I was dropping her off at work and she had to go to the bathroom. So we stopped at a Tim Hortons along the way, right? As she's getting out of the vehicle, she says, "Lock the truck." And I'm like, "Lock the truck?" Right? She says, "Lock the truck." So I'm like, okay, I lock the truck. She goes in, goes to the washroom, comes back to the truck, and she says, "I was just reading this morning that there's a rise in car thefts and carjackings, And there was a couple of carjackings that occurred while people were sitting in the passenger seat of a running vehicle, and they jumped in and drove up. And my mind, first of all, thought, because, being politically engaged and so forth, and having seen these types of stories, but the kind of thing that you can't make into a meme because it's very dangerous is to ask the question, like, well, what were the names of these people, committing the crimes in that regard? Does anybody know which? Because nobody wants to ask the question, are immigrants committing crimes at a higher rate than other people? Because these are the kinds of things that didn't happen 10 years ago. Nobody had stories about carjackings where people would jump into cars. But nowadays, your brain thinks these things, your mind goes to these things, but in a sense, you can't speak it out loud. Because to say it in a way that's direct like that is too much for like, as you say, Johan, in polite society, you don't say those kind of things, so they go unsaid. But the meme culture allows you to confront that, much in the same way that an ethnic joke allows you to confront, ethnic differences. The meme, or for example, another example would be like the political cartoon in the editorial page. It's very serious, but the editorial cartoon allows you to confront political realities in a way that are funny. And so you can hear them in a way that you might not otherwise be, because we don't talk about those kind of things in polite company.
And I think this is sort of partially some of the appeal of Trump. I mean, I don't think Americans have the same reservations that the English or Canadians do about saying true things in a mean way. There's certainly a part of American society that likes to say mean things in a true way. And there's sort of a contrarian streak there. But one of the reasons I think that Trump was able to, in 2015, rise so astronomically was because he was funny when he said lots of true things. And when he literally called Hillary Clinton to her face like a traitor to the United States and insinuated that she should be in prison. Now, like that actually, like there's plenty of evidence that could put Hillary Clinton in prison, but if it were Ted Cruz making that appeal, I think Hillary Clinton has committed crimes against the United States and she should go to jail. Like that wouldn't roll over well, and he would get rolled in the Electoral College. He would lose like 400 to 90 something. Whereas when Hillary is saying it's awfully good that Trump's not in the White House, and he goes, because you should be in jail, and the whole crowd, like it's a roast, even though it's a professional political debate. And he had constant moments like this, not just with Hillary, but with dunking on, with Rand Paul and Jeb Bush and all of these sorts of things. And now we're trying to harness sort of the same thing with this peanut deal. But it's also worth asking if in 2015 and 16 whether memes were really what ignited Trump, or if Trump himself is sort of the thing that drove all the memes, because he has a lot of mimetic power himself.
I think so. But one of the interesting things about Trump, as you mentioned Hillary and so forth, with like the lock her up and all these kind of things, is that everybody was afraid that Trump was going to do these things, but who actually did it? In the last 4 years, how many times has Trump been convicted of various quote unquote crimes? Basically a political show trial to delegitimize him as a presidential candidate. So, and this gets back to the meme power. So Trump is still funny. They're trying to get the whole thing where he makes these remarks about, well, I wish my generals were as competent as the Nazi generals, and you're like, and he gets away with this because he's funny. But at the same time, he makes jokes about it, but the administrative state and its minions actually do something about it. And so in this sense, Peanut the Squirrel underscores how the administrative state will sanctimoniously and very abstent. I can't pronounce the word, but they will with great detail and exactitude impose these rules that don't mean anything, but yet at the same time they can't impose order on the border and on immigration rules because they choose not to. So this asymmetry, again, it exposes the sort of the essence of the nature of the administrative state in a way that the left doesn't want it exposed. And Trump does a lot of that. And you can see in Trump, and I think that's what people really resonate with Trump, is that Trump allows you to see the asymmetry of state action. that the Democrats are definitely not treated the same way candidates, even though there's enough evidence to lock Hillary up. Nobody's even kind of really touched her. In fact, when they had the chance, the Attorney General basically got up in front of the camera and explained why he wasn't charging her for a crime. So all of these things, and I think these things do matter. And so Peanut the squirrel, once again, in a content-free way, exposes this asymmetry.
I think there's similar to what we were saying earlier about Peanut, precisely because the stakes are low, because he's just a squirrel. People feel liberated to fully express and unleash their pent-up emotions about the issue, because no one's going to die over Peanut the squirrel. There's an aspect of that I think was true about Trump's very existence as well, which was that he was a consummate funny man when he was up on the stage. And I think that everyone senses that if you were dealing with a serious and effective political actor, a careerist like Ted Cruz, and he said, we're going to lock my political opponent up, that's potentially scary. But Trump's a funny man, and he says it. You actually want her to be locked up, right? I'm sure a lot of people did. But they give themselves internal space to not. I'm not gonna dox the person that's cheering wildly on the camera right now for our audio listeners. You can use that to your imagination. I'm sure a lot of people wanted her to be locked up, but they had an internal conflict, which was like, yes, okay, I want Hillary to be locked up. That's how I feel. I really dislike her. I think she's done terrible things for the country. But also, I'm not sure I actually want to give myself license to fully indulge in that belief.
Well, and not only that,
aware.
I don't want to live in a country where that's a thing, right?
Right, exactly. But with Trump as the kind of somewhere in the liminal space between a serious politician and a funny man, you can have your cake and eat it because he represents an unknown quality. Like, both sides of your personality can be assuaged. The uncomfortable side can say, like, isn't it funny to indulge in this funny thing where we're all chanting, lock her up, lock her up. And the serious side of me feels like, okay, this is actually an emotional vent for something I've wanted to express in the political sphere. And I do actually think would represent justice for a long time.
Well, the thing is that Trump only said lock her up in that one time. After that, it became a meme for the crowd screaming, knock her up, lock her up. Sorry. But it became a meme, and he actually stopped saying it. Like, there's video footage of him telling people to stop, calm down. And then he was asked later why he didn't do it. And he said it was for the better of the country not to do it. So, yeah. And the whole thing with the Nazi general, he never actually said that. That's something somebody else said that he said. So it's, to watch someone like Trump, and I was completely against Trump in 2016. He pushed me to an area where I wish I would never have gone, which is the Libertarian Party. But to watch someone like him who can smack down these career politicians with one line is absolutely beautiful. Because you know that they're not honest or serious people.
No. I think how's that line go with Trump? Like, don't take him literally, but take him seriously, or something. Where, in a sense, don't listen to literally what he's saying. Just hear the message that's beneath the words. And I think that's kind of the whole meme thing, in a sense of that. If you take Trump seriously with the things that he's saying, it does come off as a meme, but you then have to look at the sort of, in a sense, like, what are the themes that he's tapping in? Like, what is, in a sense, the joke getting at? Yeah.
I can't stop laughing at the line, knock her up, knock her up. The whole crowd of people, I think that's so funny. I'm really struggling not to laugh off camera.
But it really, like, people wanted her locked up. And it goes back to the Clinton years. Like, I remember I was, it was right around the time I was leaving school and coming back to Canada to work. And this was, and it was the Clinton impeachment trial was a big deal. And it broke something in the political system in the US, I think, that just there was a whole series of lines that were crossed, and we haven't been able to come back across. Once those lines were crossed, there hasn't been a way to come back. I mean, I think in some ways the Republicans try to go back to that old order, but it isn't working. And really now you're just basically gloves off, no hold bars, and it's politics as a blood sport now. Pure there really is no rule of law anymore. And the way things have hashed out since then really kind of shows it. And it's just the exercise of naked power. And, it's the constant testing of what are the limits of naked power that we can impose. Can we, like you get in England, can we set career criminals free so that we can lock up people who have thought crimes on social media? And you're thinking, are we really in this place? And we really are. And so again, Peanut the squirrel allows you to see that in a way that is like, puts a finger like, yeah, that's exactly what it's all about. They're trying to lock up Peanut the squirrel. And so we need to free Peanut. And so everybody's willing to go to bat for Peanut the squirrel, but they're terrified to say something about their neighbor who just got locked up for praying out front of abortion clinic because they don't want to lose their job.
Someone that gives me a huge amount of hope in this space is our common friend, Oren McIntyre, because he set up what I regard as a fantastic pipeline of information sharing, in that he has an exceptional strength on Twitter, unlike really anyone I've ever seen. Every day, he will effectively distill ideas down to their simplest presentation. He's the master of the laconic tweet, just 5-7 words, and he'll nail it. It'll go viral time after time. But he set up this entire information infrastructure, which converts the following he amasses on Twitter that are attracted to those very simple ideas, those very viral ideas, through a pipeline that includes written pieces, that includes long-form interviews and audio, into the full expression of those ideas, and indeed into book recommendations, quite challenging works from history. So I think that's the model. I think that's the license we have to give ourselves if we're going to engage in this kind of fairly, I think this is actually a very interesting space. I'm gonna call it a little bit low IQ. I hope that's said with love. I've enjoyed the Peanut discourse immensely, but I think the license that we have to, that the license to engage in that has to be contingent on us not devolving into a pure, Q tier meme sphere that's emphasizing only virality, but that is always conscious of the intentional construction of that pipeline up to sophisticated and well-justified ideas.
Well, yeah, C.S. Lewis has a great quote about this. And he said, if you can't translate your thoughts into uneducated language, then your thoughts are confused. Power to translate is the test of having really understood one's own meaning. And I think that's what Oren does very well.
Well, it's also, in a sense, what, in this way, what a preacher's supposed to do, right? Because you're speaking out to a congregation, and you might have an 8-year-old. You might have a tradesman with no education, but you might also have a college professor in your same congregation, and you have to be able to communicate the word intelligently to all these different groups, from somebody who may be a new believer, somebody who may be a long-time believer, somebody with very set opinions that maybe do need to actually be undermined so they become replaced with popular or proper biblical concepts, these types of things. But so there's that idea as well. And I think, you look in a conversation like this, yeah, we can talk about Peanut the squirrel, but one of the reasons why we actually come on to talk about Peanut the squirrel is that, yeah, okay, nobody wants to be talking about Peanut the squirrel, but there's a whole layer of real, actual, serious discourse that makes Peanut the squirrel possible. And we know it, and that's in some sense why we talk about it, because we look at this and say, this is an almost perfect vehicle to talk about, these 5 or 6 thinkers and everything that they have written. And that kind of stuff really matters. And people connect with it, and we can now bring it to a level where, like, just look at Peanut. That explains it. And then people can go like, okay, yeah, I kind of get what you're talking about now. Boom, it's done.
And it just so happens those thinkers are Jacques Ellul, Walter Ong,
Carl Schmidt.
Carl Schmidt, all of Kraptos' favorite thinkers.
Well, there's some others. There's C.S. Lewis. There's Burnham.
Gerard.
You can look,
I know, I'm kidding.
Gerard.
It is.
Oh yeah,
It is a useful vehicle.
Well, and that's fun because I can laugh at myself because I just, that's okay. I have to some days because otherwise I get way too serious.
I need to stock up on my Dutch jokes. The only one that springs to mind that you can do in an English accent is is Michael Caine saying, "There's only two things I hate in this world: intolerant people and the Dutch."
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. There is plenty. There's many.
There's
that
a big stable.
There is a big staple, and most of them would get us canceled off of YouTube, because they involve interactions between the Dutch and other ethnic groups and the making of money. Yeah, you can just fill up the rest yourself. They play beautifully. You might have even heard one or two of them, but yeah. That being said, there is a whole genre of actually, you could call it Dutch thinking, but they're like proverbial sayings that are very, very funny. And there was a whole era where they would put these little proverbial sayings onto basically tiles. So you're like the bathroom tile size, and then you can either integrate them into walls or just hang them up as things. But they don't make them anymore because they went out of fashion, and so they're all collector's items
because they suck.
Well, if you don't know Dutch, they're not nearly as funny. But I've got a whole collection of them, and I know what they all mean. So, but it's
and that's the mimetic power of the Dutch in your restroom when you're taking a loo.
That's right.
The British would say.
That's right.
That's not a British expression.
No, but actually, what's in the bathroom though is your Dutch birthday calendar, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Dutch birthday calendar, but it has no days of the week. So it's just basically every month, and it lists the days like 1 to 30, 1 to 31, and on that you're supposed to write people's birthdays, grandmothers, whatever. So if you go visiting to someone's house, you can always tell if you're one of their nearest and dearest friends is if your name made it to their birthday calendar, and that's how you know. Once you make it to the birthday calendar, you're a dear friend. If you're not on the birthday calendar yet, you're outside of the circle of trust.
Yeah, it took me 2 months of dating my wife to get to the birthday calendar.
That sounds very Dutch. If you're interested, I could get you a nice one and have it shipped out to you. There's various different styles, and Anton Pieck is probably the favorite for most. And then Vermeers are also another good one to do for the calendar. But yeah, so there you go. But I think with that, we've probably, unless somebody has something else really to add, I think that we have pretty much mined Peanut the Squirrel to his absolute depths, and we've come up with 55 minutes of content from Peanut the Squirrel. So I think that's a job well done, gentlemen.
Hey. Thanks so much for having us, and thanks for,
you're very
for keeping
welcome.
this discussion moving.
It's fun. So anybody who's made it to minute 55, thank you. And again, everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Seeking the Hidden Thing is delighted to have Axios Fitness Coaching as a sponsorship partner. JD is one of our guys and wants to make you fit for what's coming ahead. He offers a premium resource for holistic strength and conditioning. Axios offers standalone training programs as well as individual coaching options should your needs require something more specific. Click on either the image below or the link in the description. Both I and JD thank you for your support.
you.